This is Scott Richmond.
And Arnie Sherman.
You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. Arnie Sherman, a very good Sunday morning to you.
It's always good to start off my Sunday morning with you here, Scott, in the studio. We have a great show lined up, as we always do, for today. We're going to have Skye McGinty, who is the executive director of the All Nations Health Center, visiting us. It's one of 41 urban Indian health programs funded around the United States. We're lucky to have it here in Missoula. They do all kinds of interesting programs, both for physical and mental health and sort of holistic health. They work with a large number of Native communities around the state and beyond Native communities. It's All Nations now because it works with anybody that has health needs and health problems. They're in the midst, I think, of early stages of a capital campaign or trying to find a new facility to create a better identity. And I'm interested in learning more about not only All Nations Health Center, but Skye herself, who's got 3 degrees from the University of Montana.
Yes.
And has specialized in social justice and inequality and also has an MBA. It's rare when you have someone who mixes the social sciences, so to speak, with a business degree.
Yeah, when I first met her, I was really struck by her background.
So it's a dual show, a show to learn about what the organization does, but also a show to learn more about Skye McGinty.
Always good to meet new members of the community on the radio show here, and I know she's been up here before, but not with us.
Right, so we can help her share. We can help her share her story in our own inimitable way.
Right. She hasn't met the 2 guys from back east.
Right. Yeah.
Where it's all about discovery.
We talk about that a lot, but I've been here for 27 years now, so I'm really this is the longest I've lived anywhere in my life. So I'm a Montanan.
Right, and you know that every day when you meet someone like a Skye McGinty, and you're like, you are a Montanan, and this is not unfamiliar to you. You're aware of what she's working on and what she's doing and how it impacts the community.
Absolutely.
Okay, when we come back, our guest will be Skye McGinty. Back after these words. Arnie, we are back with our guest, Skye McGinty, Executive Director of the All Nations Health Center here in Missoula.
Skye, it's good to have you here this morning. How are you?
Thanks for having me. Good. How about you?
We're doing great. We're excited to have you here so we can find out a lot more than we already know about All Nations Health Center. Awesome. So you've only been there as the Executive Director for a couple of years now, but 2
years this past June. That's right.
So tell us what you do. Where do you fit into the health kind of sort of continuum and a little bit about the history of the organization?
Sure. So All Nations has been around in the Missoula community for, 53 years now. We were incorporated in 1970, and we were a direct result of some really intentional legislation set forth by the federal government, which was really to take Native people from their allotments, from their reservations, and to basically forcibly assimilate them into urban spaces. And so the need for our Native people to practice their culture and to celebrate their heritage and really to be able to connect with their community arose out of that purposeful legislation. And so through a couple of congressional acts, urban Indian organizations like All Nations were created really to serve as a hub, as a conduit for our Native people and their culture. Eventually, that became a hub for health as well. As Native people, we know our health and wellness isn't just tied to our physical body. It isn't just tied to our brain. It's also tied to our spirituality and our emotional health as well. And really community health is our health at the end of the day, not just the individual person. It's reflective of our entire families. And so we started out as a pretty humble volunteer-centered organization. We made some connections with the University of Montana. We hosted some small wellness fairs, some very basic health education, some immunizations, and now we've grown to have almost 50 employees. We have our full-on medical department that we started in 2018. We run the gamut of Western medicine health, really anything you would find at any other healthcare setting, but with that indigenous flavor running through it.
So there are 41 urban Indian health programs.
That's right.
Is this the only one in Montana?
Nope. We have 4 other sister sites. We have the second highest density of urban Indian organizations here in Montana.
And are the programs similar, or did they really get crafted to what's taking place in the community and fitting into where needs are unmet?
Yeah, I would say the philosophy is very similar. We all share, the drive to preserve our culture as Native people and to really have that culturally specific, holistic flavor of care. But it really depends on the type of urban community. Obviously, Missoula looks a lot different than Billings, and so we're going to have different priorities than those folks might have.
And how many clients a year do you serve?
Right now, we see about 3,500.
Wow.
And are there more in one area than another? Are they more in health-related services than the other areas that you're dealing with?
We see a lot of behavioral health needs right now, which is probably not a shocker to anyone, especially on the heels of the pandemic. We have a lot of youth services, so we serve over 800 Native kiddos right here in Missoula County. So we do a lot of work with that, and then we just started our dental program as well. So that's seeing also a lot of numbers.
Well, you mentioned COVID, and you also mentioned just a few minutes earlier that it's talking about community issues. And of course, Native communities deal with a lot of the issues that other, underrepresented communities deal with, things like safety and racism and, discrimination, violence. We have a movie that's coming out right now about the Osage Indians that's going to shed a lot of light for a lot of people on, a horrible chapter in American history, alcoholism, job opportunity, all those sorts of things. And they're all part of not just an individual mental health, but the community itself's mental health. So how do you build trust with a community that's been bombarded by lots of different things over their history? How do you build trust to engage with them on these kinds of issues?
Yeah, I think we really started that process 50 years ago. I would say compared to our sister sites in Montana, that we really started in a community-based healthcare way. We didn't start out trying to do Western medicine or Western care. We started by building those relationships and bridging that gap and rapport that Native people understandably have with Western medicine, the deep and long history of racism, of medical mistreatment, and, just not wanting to be
distrust.
Right, and be subjected to those kinds of environments. And so we help bridge that gap by, employing people who have the same lived experiences, who are reflective of our Native community. I mean, nothing builds trust the same way as seeing someone who looks like you or has the same, familiar family name that you might have seen in your reservation or rural area. And so we're able to build that trust with our folks by literally meeting them where they're at. We're ingrained in our community in a way that I think no other health clinic would be. And that's because we really value, those indigenous values of being together, being in community, creating relationships.
How are we different here in Missoula than we are in the other major metropolitan areas of Montana?
Oh my gosh, I think Missoula is so fortunate as a community. I think just the appetite for change here. I mean, I think this was an old statistic, but I heard that we have the most nonprofits per capita,
that's true.
Right, that's
in
true.
the U.S., which I think, really just signifies this community's need and appetite for social change, for the desire to help one another and to be in community. So I think we are incredibly fortunate in a way that, other Montana communities aren't.
And do you commiserate and talk to and connect with your other peers in the other communities?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. We share a lot of the same advocacy goals, whether that's at the state or federal level. But yeah, we do have a lot of resource connection. We share best practices, tips and tricks, personnel policies, all of that.
So I come back to town, turn on my TV. The first thing I see is you
Yay,
on
it's out
TV
there.
talking about Medicare enrollment. And we're in the middle. I think October 15th to December 7th is the Medicare enrollment period, which is confusing to anybody.
Right.
But when you're dealing with tribal elders who, maybe are not as familiar with how all of this works as, as people who are in the field, how do you convey to them, get to them that, what the importance of this and that there's this enrollment period? It's a complicated thing to try to simplify, to explain to somebody.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know the TV spot. It's the first time I've ever seen a TV spot, for a segment of the population
specific to them, right?
But is it working, or is the reason you have it on there is because you have a hard time connecting with elders?
Yeah, I mean, I hear all the time that people are seeing it, which is great. It means it's getting out there. I think it's a lot of education. I think a lot of those applications are purposely esoteric. They are just really hard to navigate. And that's discouraging, right? That's defeating to be like, I just don't understand this piece of paper in front of me. And so we do a lot of education, a lot of work with our elders. Of course, that also means getting in with the rest of the family to make sure they have coverage. And of course, we've got to help grandma and grandpa get connected to that as well.
Right.
So a lot of it is just doing that outreach, that education to let folks know that they're not alone and that, they're not the only ones frustrated by the process, but that we're here to help.
Now, you have, 3 locations in Missoula?
We do, yep.
And you're looking to build a corporate identity or corporate headquarters or a new facility?
Yep, our own clinic facility. Yep. So right now we're separated between our admin building, our medical home, which is our clinic, and then our behavioral health folks as well, which doesn't lend itself very well to our integrated model of healthcare when we can't be physically integrated.
You don't have a one-stop shopping kind of operation.
That's right. That's the plan.
Are you relying on, the St. Pat's and the different, community hospitals in town to actually help deliver therapies and different, treatments?
Yeah, I would say that we're all a part of the same safety net. We're all connected in that way. But really, the purpose of All Nations and the purpose of urban Indian organizations is to intervene before folks have to go to the hospital. It's that primary care. It's that preventative care, which we know is hard to get every single person into, but Native people especially.
Sure.
And so really, it's about us getting to those health issues before they become health problems.
Is that really the number one challenge?
There are so many challenges.
Well, there's got to be one on the top.
Yeah, I mean, that one's definitely one. The insurance piece is always difficult. Just letting people know that we're here in the community and that we serve more than just our Native population is,
Anybody can walk in the door.
Absolutely. That's why we're called All Nations.
Right. Funding, where does it come from?
So we hold a Title V contract with the Indian Health Service. So we are contracted through the federal government. That's part of treaty rights from, some very old legislation when Native tribes first entered a peer-to-peer relationship with the government. And so we have direct funding from them. But honestly, we sort of patchwork our operations through a number of local, state, and federal grant opportunities. And then, of course, we have a third-party billing system that comes from, our medical and behavioral health appointments.
And clients pay for some of the services, right?
That's right. Yep. We operate on a sliding fee scale. We're here for our most marginalized community members, which are often low-income, Medicaid-eligible folks. So that makes up the backbone of our third party.
What would you, for the Missoula community, the non-native Missoula community, the non-indigenous community, what would you want them to know about All Nations? How would you like them? I mean, to Arnie's point, a lot of us are first coming into contact with it through TV spots.
Yeah.
What would you like them to know about the organization?
Yeah, I mean, first off, we do truly serve all nations. That was originally why we changed our name from the Missoula Urban Indian Health Center, really to be reflective of our community orientation. Of course, that means that we have that cultural thread woven into every single thing that we do, but that's open for every single person. And so I think it's sort of non-Native people getting over the gatekeeping of self and saying, I think it comes from a good place of intention of we don't want to take up space where someone else might need to have that space like Native folks. But it's so important that, we share our culture and celebrate our heritage with non-Native folks. I mean, that's also the reason that we do what we do.
Do you think that we could do a better job at sharing each other's culture?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Absolutely.
And how do we do that? How do we do that? Like, I mean, I agree with you. I think
some of us aren't cultured, so there's a problem there. But for those that are,
right. But how do we do that? Like, because I'm impressed. We talked a couple of weeks ago when we first set this meeting up, and I was just like, boy, as a spokesperson and as somebody who's articulating a mission, they're second to none. So how would you, say, here's my 3-point plan. Here's how we're going to integrate a lot more effectively.
Man, we're just solving all of the world's problems right
Yeah, we
here.
have to.
We have to. Nobody else is.
Right?
It happens here, actually,
Yeah.
locally.
I mean, I think it really starts on that micro individual level. I think it really starts, being open to experiences outside of your own, being open to other people's realities, and also being humble and recognizing that your culture and the way that you grew up is not the only way. There is no right way, right, to exist as a person. But I think also having the humility to say, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to mispronounce this sacred place, or I'm going to mispronounce this person's name.
Right.
Or I'm not going to get it right 100% of the time. None of us can. That's an impossible thing. There are so many different cultures out there. And to be mindful of every single one is, I think, beyond human capability. So I think just having that openness with ourselves of saying, I want to be open to this, but I'm going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay.
So you keep talking about us, and I think for our listeners, you're an enrolled member of the Little Shell Chippewa tribe.
That's right.
And the organization started in 1970. Mm-hmm. Clearly, you weren't around in 1970. So tell us a little about your background. How did you meander your way to being the executive director of this organization?
I'm still trying to figure that out, quite honestly. I'm originally from Malta, Montana, over in northeastern Montana, about 60 miles south of the Canadian border. So as you can imagine, it's pretty flat out there, pretty prairie. It's a lot different than over here in our pretty little valley. Missoula was the farthest place I could get away from Malta and still have my Native American tuition waiver honored in state. Nice. I came here one time, I think, when I was a junior in high school and just absolutely fell in love with the mountains and the trees. And we don't have very many trees on the prairie, so that was really cool to see. And then, I ended up staying at the University of Montana for 3 degrees because I just couldn't get enough of that student loan debt and decided that I wanted even more.
More.
Why not?
Need more. I want to break the record. I want to break a record here.
Yeah, and then I tried to get out of Missoula a couple of different times, thought about moving to Seattle or to Portland or maybe even out of the country. And the universe told me no, that this is where I needed to be. The universe,
right. Well, did you have any early life mentors or folks that influenced you, that helped you steer you in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, I met my former boss actually when I was in college, and he had a really long history of working specifically in urban Indian health, and just seeing all of the growth that he had gone through and that he had made in, his communities and different communities that he had been plugged into was really inspiring. But honestly, a lot of my inspiration draws from the matriarchs in my life, my mom and my grandma, who are just, I mean, maybe everybody thinks this about their mom and grandma, but I just find them to be so inspiring. Women who, in the face of huge adversity and huge trauma, just always find the ability to smile and to be kind and to never let that bog them down. And so I think sort of that indomitable spirit is something that I want to carry forward in my work.
It's hard to have that indomitable spirit when the cultural pressures on Native communities has been so, strident over the years. I mean, it would be hard to always have a positive attitude, even in Montana, because of the stereotypes and the prejudices and the innate nature of or the ingrained nature of it in some people.
Yeah,
you have to deal with it. Whether you're in Malta, which is the other, like Montana's 2 states, it's all flat and then
basically
it comes, boom, and all of a sudden it's like a different place.
Exactly.
But in Malta or anywhere else in the state.
Yep. I mean, that's something we constantly combat. I think, the missing and murdered indigenous relatives epidemic is definitely demonstrative of that. It doesn't matter if you're a tribal community, a rural community, or you're right here in Missoula where, we're at the intersection of a really big interstate. And, we have direct ties to Canada. That's sort of a trafficking playground right there. So no matter what it is, I mean, as Native people, we run into those issues wherever we are.
And it's one of the most, insidious to me indignities that Native Americans have to suffer, because those stereotypes are very hard to break from people that are not part of the community. Mm-hmm. We're seeing a Palestinian-Israeli conflict going on now, and there's lots of stereotypes, being foisted on the public related to anti-Semitism or attacks on Palestinians. Wherever your political preferences or your loyalties are, but natives historically over the years have always had these very tough stereotypes to overcome, and it fits into all the other things, whether it's health, it's just hard to deal with. It's even hard to talk about to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, it's a triple up effect.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we were, and still are the original inhabitants of this land. And, to see what it is today can be disheartening and discouraging to see, all of the work that we put in here, all of the effort we put into building communities that are safe and wholesome and holistic, and to see it sort of turned into, the Western mainstream communities we have now.
I had one of the guests on one of my other shows, Mariah Gladstone, who has Indigya Kitchen.
Yeah, that's right.
And her cousin is Lily Gladstone, who's in the film. Mariah talked about how these diets were forced on reservations, and then, and it led to diabetes and all these other kinds of diseases that Native Americans hadn't experienced before that.
Yeah.
Until, they were forced into these regimes by, the conquerors, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. Being separated from our traditional food systems has a lot of negative health outcomes. Like you said, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, when things are introduced to our diet, we talk about fry bread a lot, which is part of our resilience story, but that was never part of our traditional diet.
No.
I mean, man, is it good. I mean, I love it now.
Right.
But, that wasn't what my ancestors were eating, and it's not really any food that really any person should consume for a long time.
Skye, to get back to what Arnie was saying with respect to, a lot of people who don't know enough and aren't educated and operate out of fear are disruptive, and they like to muddy the waters and make the messages kind of meld into each other and kind of create confusion, right? So it always feels like education and just persistence and education and being, visible is the way where you're going to break through, right? So does all nations look to you, and do your peers in the state look to you as being someone who could actually kind of rise above the din of, this confusion conversation and create some clarity? And are they putting you out there in a way where you could really impact more people than just Missoula?
Yeah. I mean, I think All Nations certainly does have that platform. I think having had such long-lasting roots in this community, we absolutely have that trust of our Native community and those non-Native people who know us. I think that we're able to advocate on a different level than, say, other groups might. And, as the only Native-led organization that isn't tied to the University of Montana or to MCPS, we often get all of the issues, whether that's climate change or housing or childcare, all of these deep systemic issues that most, disproportionately affect our Native people. We are escalated to that platform of do something about it or say something about it. But personally, myself, I do find it a little bit easier since, I'm a white presenting Native person, and I think it's easier for me to navigate that.
And then how do you, in that same breath, prevent you from being co-opted by somebody who needs to, right? Say, well, look, I need to make peace with the indigenous community. We've been, we've been developing this land over here at their expense for so long. We need to get a better relationship, and so they try to co-opt you. And how do you prevent that from happening?
I think a lot of that is my own personal screening out of things. I think I can sense it a mile off of where that intention is coming from. Totally.
Right, Arnie? No,
sure.
But
no
Arnie,
question.
Arnie, by way of background, has such, macro view of kind of how things work from his work in Russia to where probably, right, and all
I've been around a lot of groups that have been discriminated against one way or another for,
and or co-opted.
And co-opted in time immemorial.
Exactly. So, like, what advice would you give to Skye? Right? And what advice, you've seen? Because I actually...
It's hard. Youthful enthusiasm, and intelligence and craftiness, perseveres. At some point you were in it so long, and elders are to be respected, obviously, but sometimes when you've been through the battles and the wars for 40, 50 years, you have a hard time, trying to regroup, so to speak, and tackle it, one more time.
Yeah.
I always admire Joe McDonald, Salish Kootenai College, for taking on, for always being optimistic and positive and being a great community leader. Yeah. But it's hard to overcome a lot of these things, and at some point you just sort of, get your dander up and you just want to dig in and just, say, enough is enough. But on the other hand, there are things like, Killers, that's coming out, Killers of the Flower Moon, that's going to educate a lot of people to, a horrible piece of history. Right. And some of America's greatest actors are going to be in that, portraying bad people doing bad things to good people. Yeah. But
that'll break through.
And that'll break through. Unlike some of the, the stereotypes, like when you watch Yellowstone and they show...
I was going to say, Yellowstone is
I tell everybody, I said, most of the tribal leaders in Montana don't have a chauffeur-driven limousine, wear $5,000 suits, and went to Harvard. That's not usually the tribal leader guys, And that perpetuates a different kind of stereotype for a different reason.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that generationally speaking, the younger generation who's more open and who is willing to kind of keep the slate clean and develop their own opinions, that's your greatest asset, you as a communicator and as an advocate and as somebody who's working with them. And so what are you doing to recruit and educate and speak to that generation? Because that's the future, right?
Yeah, and I mean, as an Indigenous value, I mean, our youth are our future, right? I mean, we recognize that the time we have now, the piece of land that we occupy now is not ours. It belongs to our kids, to the youth.
Right.
You know, and it's, I mean, Native cultures aren't a monolith, but generally there's the 7 generations teaching that anything that we're doing here, we have to act and behave as if this is going to impact our 7th great grandkids. You know, and I think also just taking in that value and passing that on to the youth. I mean, they're also thinking in that capacity of what I'm doing now is going to have impacts for my community. And it's really about listening to them at the end of the day and involving them in decision making, not just saying, oh, we think the youth like TikTok, so let's do stuff on TikTok. That's great, but they care about things. They're so much more educated, I feel like, than any other generation. They have so much access to what is right and what is wrong, and they're able to make those decisions sort of independently of mom and dad's lenses. And so I think just having that safe space where our Native youth especially are able to connect to one another and to themselves, that's how we sort of create that platform for them to take on the issues.
Right. Plus, you have a unique perspective. I mean, you're running All Nations Health, and a lot of it's related to physical health, and we're going to get back to talk about
behavioral,
Medicare and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But you had a sort of a focus, on issues of social justice.
Yeah.
And it's hard to look at what has historically happened and what continues to happen through a social justice lens and feel like I got to do something about this stuff. It just can't keep going on and on and on the way it is.
Yeah. And I think, despite or maybe in light of my degrees, I think a lot of Native people sort of have that social justice lens orientation. I always say like DIE, like diversity, inclusion, and equity is woven into every single thing that we do because it's always had to been a struggle for basic human rights, for basic rights to vote, for housing, for to be seen as humans at the end of the day.
Sure.
And I think, especially, people in my generation now, we're seeing our parents and our grandparents as survivors of boarding schools, all of the things that they went through and being completely dehumanized and ripped from their culture.
Right, just picked up, taken, put on a train, shipped someplace east, put into different clothes, and just treated like their history never existed.
Right, yep, and just to churn out more white people, right, to kill the Indian and save the man. And so I think we're seeing a lot of that in my generation and saying, no, we don't want to repeat that. We want to be proud of the people that we are now. And it's, it's kind of cool to be Native again. Like, we want to bring that back, not only for ourselves, but for our kids. Right,
and America in many places is much more of a melting pot than in other countries, that are much more homogeneous, than in a lot of other places. Growing up back east, Scott and I both grew up back east. It was very multi-generational culture.
Melting pot.
Total melting pot. Here it's a little bit different, although I think when Native population in Montana is almost 8%, I believe.
Went up a lot during the census,
Yeah, so you got, you have a 80,000, 90,000. I mean, it's the largest minority population in the state.
Yeah.
Let's do a quick ID. Our guest is Skye McGinty, Executive Director of the All Nations Health Center. Arnie.
I want to get back to the TV commercial.
Okay.
We're in the middle of Medicare enrollment. What's your biggest challenge getting people to enroll? I mean, you wouldn't be running this campaign and putting these TV spots if there wasn't a problem. So what's the problem and what do you have to do to overcome it?
Yeah, so specifically, we're doing a lot of Medicaid enrollment, which is, anybody under the age of 64 and on. And really, the main issue with that is that a lot of folks are low income. They might live in rural areas where you're not getting that letter from the state that says, update your information. A lot of the people who are being disenrolled from Medicaid are due to administrative errors. So maybe they didn't submit their tax filing or, they oriented their driver's license the wrong way, whatever that might be. And, just being ground down by that system, it is a little dehumanizing to say, okay, this is my income, this is my household size, like to justify the reason why you need health insurance. We all need health insurance. It's not a justifiable thing.
Right.
And so I think that's the biggest thing is just educating folks about the importance of having that insurance, especially our Native folks who are used to getting Indian Health Service. And because we don't pay for our health care when we're in an IHS facility, coming into an urban area, you kind of make those same assumptions, right?
Right. And you're talking about people over 64, so that people that were born in the 50s, who they are a different generation than, than they're not as computer literate. They're not as easy to go through information and
they're not scanning
download.
the QR codes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it, for a lot of them, they haven't been connected to that system, and that system is the lifeline into the Medicare world.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
It's such a, when I think about media, like you're using broadcast media, what else are you doing to communicate? What else are you doing to try to get to that community to say you need to take advantage of this now?
Carrier pigeons, skywriters, like a little bit of everything. Our Native community really flocks to Facebook. So that's where we're doing a lot of our, whether it's programming updates or service closures, whatever it is, that's where we're getting the news out. And that sort of matriculates into families, right? We're really relying on word of mouth, whether mom hears it or uncle hears it or the kid hears it. It's sort of that diffusion of, this is what's going on at All Nations, or did you know they have this service, or did you know we need to keep an eye out for this deadline? So we do a lot of Facebook. Again, we do a lot of the boots on the ground outreach. So making sure we're embedded at the Western Montana Fair, at the WIC office, at Missoula Public Health, at the Pain Center on campus, wherever our people are, that's where we want to be, and that's where we want to be educating them.
Have you been involved at all, or have you spoken to any of the candidates for running for mayor right now and kind of talked about All Nations and, have they given thought to how they help serve the community within the community?
Yeah, so I work with Andrea Davis at Homeward outside of her mayoral candidacy,
right?
As her position as executive director there, and we're working, pretty closely on the Trinity project that's coming online here soon.
Okay.
Homeward is helping us. Actually, the piece of land that we bought, we're trying to also have a housing component on it. So Homeward is doing a feasibility study for us. So we work sort of in those capacities. Yeah.
Got it.
So you are one of the rare people who have combined an interest in sociology and, inequity and social justice with a business degree. You have an MBA.
It's very counterintuitive.
Well, right. But you're now supervising an organization with 50 employees. Mm-hmm. So how does that feel? How much of your time is drained away from your passion interests to your administrative issues, running an organization, trying to find a new building, figuring out whether the land could be used for housing, all these other things that take you away from, your original, career focus?
Yeah, I think I don't let it is really the thing. I make sure that lens, my sociological training is always there. And then, of course, my background as a Native person and, my mother's family and all the lived experiences that come from that. I think that's just interwoven into everything that I do. And I don't think I would be showing up authentically if it wasn't. I think there is the realities of, the politics of business and running a nonprofit in a place that's very saturated with nonprofits. But everything I do is led by those values as a sociologist and as the Indigenous values that I bring to the table.
So in the small time when you're not working, what hobbies and interests do you have outside of all this?
What is that like?
What is that like?
What is Skye about?
Yeah, what is Skye about?
I really love to hike. I'm a hiker. I love the Bitterroots. That's like my second home. I have a little scruffy res mutt from Fort Belknap that we hike a lot. That's my favorite thing to do. I used to be really into beading. Was into that for a long time. But yeah, right now I'm really into reading. Just hanging out, drinking coffee when I can.
Do you travel?
Oh, yeah, whenever I can.
Where do you like to go?
Me and my good friend just got back from Scotland about a year ago. That was our nice international
Where
travel
did you
trip.
go? Where in Scotland?
Oh, my gosh, everywhere.
Weather worse than we have. That's what you found out, right?
Yeah, honestly, though, but it is so beautiful there.
It's beautiful. Everything's
it's a storybook.
green because it's never sunny and it's just raining all the time.
All the time. But it is like a fairy tale. It's so
you went to
beautiful.
Edinburgh, right? You saw the castle. Yeah. That is fairy tale.
It is beautiful.
You can see hobbits and other dragons flying out of the castle at Edinburgh.
Yep, all the fairies in the Highlands. Yeah.
You got a favorite restaurant here in Missoula?
Oh, here we go.
Oh, that's a good one.
Or not.
I really love Tamarack. I'm like a hardcore Tamarack fan.
Hard not to like Tamarack.
It really is.
It's got a lot. It's a very diverse menu, right? You can get. You can probably. I think one time they had fry bread on that menu.
Yeah.
In fact,
Montana
I'm sure
Bulldog, best cocktail in Missoula.
Were there any restaurants to eat in Malta?
We have a Dairy Queen.
Gas station, Dairy Queen.
Yeah,
everything. Corn dogs at the gas station.
Everything
right?
comes in frozen.
Yeah.
Yep, that's about it.
Yeah, that's why you travel. Actually,
yeah, exactly.
How far to the closest box store from Malta for those of our listeners who are new here to get to a
Walmart?
Well, they built a Walmart in Havre, which is about an hour and a half from Malta, but they built that when I was like a senior in high school.
Right.
I would say about 4 hours. Great Falls is like the nearest like urban hub. hub.
Yeah, so the ice cream bars kind of melt by the time you bring them home from the box store.
I don't know. It's pretty cold up there, so if you put it in the back of the truck, it'll stay cold.
That's exactly right.
What do you think about the explosive growth of Missoula, and for that matter, most of Montana?
It's crazy.
In the sense of just so many more people, or just traffic, like all the above?
I think it's a little bit of all of the above. I mean, I don't think our infrastructure was ready for that. I mean, I take reserve on the way home and I'm sitting in traffic for like 20 minutes just waiting to get home.
We have a commute here now.
We do, I know. And I was only
a
ever
mini
used
commute, but it's a commute. But you're right. If you're going the wrong direction at the wrong time on Reserve Street, you're backed up 4, 5, 6 lights.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, the traffic jams we had in Malta were, a swather is on the road. And that's like 10 minutes.
So there's different reporting. There are 11 tribes, 12. How many tribes in Montana?
So there's 8 federally recognized. So Little Shell Chippewa was the most recently federally recognized in 2019. We slipped in a defense bill, but there are also state recognized tribes. So that's where you get like the 11 or the 12, depending on who you ask.
And how much do they end up cooperating? I mean, I understand some of the history. They have their own land. They have their own turfdoms. They have their own leadership. They have their own. They're pretty independent, but how do you get them to work together? Because you're trying to work together with all of them. Yeah,
I mean, it's a difficulty. I won't lie. I mean, it's its own government. It's the same thing as the U.S. working with Mexico and Canada and Indonesia. They're their own independent governments with their own independent sovereignty, their own lands, their own resources. And so sometimes it is, I think, difficult. I do think we do, as Native people, sort of have the upper hand in terms of collaborating with one another because we share that value that at the end of the day, it's about the community. It's not about us. And sometimes in government, you don't get that. You get, the greed and the selfishness and the I'm looking out for me and my family.
Yeah.
But I think as Native people, we understand that whatever we're doing well, we can do well for all of us, not just for one.
How can we impact the indigenous community, the Native community, to maybe vote more, to be more politically active, to be more socially active? Because I think there's a lot of communities within Montana that, they just like, oh, well, I can't impact this, so I kind of throw my hands up.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's differing philosophies all across the spectrum, right? I think some Native people would say, I'm not interested in voting. I'm not interested in participating in the system, that has oppressed us since white contact in 1492. And then I think that sort of swings the other way of I'll only vote in presidential races, whereas we know, that local races are really the ones that have the most impact on our lives.
Absolutely.
But I think, it's kind of striking that balance of, it is important to participate and to be, in your community and to have that civic participation. Whether or not it aligns with your values is sort of a call you have to make at the end of the day. But I think it's, with most things, it starts with the youth. It starts with getting the message out to them.
And to have a voice and a seat at the table as well, right? That changes everything, or can. It's the start of changing everything when you can start having a seat at the table.
Right. Yep. And in a way that feels authentic to our communities. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw what happened down in Arizona this last presidential race with the Navajo and the Dene folks, like literally riding horses to the polls. It was just a whole column of horses in their regalia and the Native people down there in their regalia, and making it authentic to us and saying we are literally riding to the polls. We are doing something that we have done forever, our ways of life focused around this animal, and we're going to go and show up.
Yeah, which is cool, which is, important, right?
Absolutely. So you report back to your funding sources, right? They want, as most non-profit organizations have to be accountable to the people giving them money. What do you describe to them as the most unmet needs in the community here?
Ooh, that's a good one. I mean, behavioral health is a really tough one. Yeah. I would say, we are able to bill for the things that the Western mainstream community thinks is billable.
Billable, right.
But again, our health and our wellness is so much more about that ingrown toenail or about our mental health at the end of the day.
Right.
And we can't bill for things like traditional services. We can't bill for a sweat lodge or for smudging someone's house or providing traditional guidance or having ceremony. But that is health and wellness to us. That at the end of the day is the crux of Native health. And to have that sort of pushed aside of like, no, that's ancillary or that's just a bonus. That's really difficult because we want to be doing that work. We want to bring people back to ceremony and into traditional life ways and understandings. But when it doesn't have a return on investment at the end of the day, it's really hard to play ball in the capitalistic scape we're in.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was afraid of.
That was the answer I was afraid of too.
Yeah. When you're dealing with all of these, particularly when you're trying to approach things from a holistic way,
right,
and to maintain, cultural integrity, and to try to meld in with an establishment that is, in many ways, condescending to the the Native community as it is to other minority communities often. We did all these horrible things and we'll throw them a bone. I can say that as an outsider. I mean, it's never been fairly, and it probably never. It's not possible to fairly resolve what transpired.
Past.
The movement in California to give slaves, money for what happened to them. I mean, it's just so hard to unbundle and unwrap all of that. But moving forward, you can do something, more concrete. And you're just, articulating very clearly how difficult it is from saying we want to do these things, and then when you bring to the table the things that really need to be done, if you really want to get this accomplished, and having them say, "Well, that's not the way we see it,"
right?
And we being outside the community and outside the bubble, it's a tough set of dynamics, and it's not unlike some of the other places in the world outside of the United States where there's conflict and there's history and. There's finger pointing, and it's hard to unravel everything, and it's being looked at from a perspective that is not organic to the culture and the population you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Well, and a related thought on what Arnie just said, post pandemic, and just looking at our society today with the polarization. I mean, everybody has just retreated in their corners and they can't find a middle place to meet and accept each other's points of view. And you go through something like a pandemic, which really challenged everybody, right? But surely had a profound impact on the indigenous and the Native community. How do you look at that? And then you said Facebook, it happens to be probably the most important way of communicating with the community. How do you take all of that and say, we have to get better, we have to be better, right? We have to not let those things distract us.
Yeah. I mean, I think if any silver lining came out of the pandemic, I think it underscored the resilience that all of our communities have. I mean, we faced truly a global trauma together. And that was such a rich opportunity for us to come together and say, we've got you. I've got you.
Right.
That you might not be my blood relative, you might not even be my neighbor, but we all inhabit this little round marble, and therefore we have an obligation to take care of one another.
Right.
And I think, especially for the Native population, we lost so many people and so many elders in particular, our knowledge keepers, our culture keepers. I think, not to decentralize it, but I think, having gone through boarding school era, having gone through the 60s scoop era, having gone through this forced assimilation, it's just one additional trauma that's like, okay, we've been through this. We know that we can get through it. There are going to be huge, huge losses, but we know at the end of the day, as a community, we'll make it on the other side.
I love your optimism. I remember being in Northern Ireland 20 years ago, and I heard somebody in a conversation say, I could never live, in a Protestant dominated, because my uncle in 1821 was killed by a Protestant.
Right.
I mean, that's how, ingrained it was. And, it's hard to have, I'm being honest, hard to have a lot of optimism after, what the indigenous community in this country has gone through.
Yeah. Well, to your point, Scott, I think, that really underscores, why we see that division and that divisiveness in our communities is because we are holding on to those things from so long ago. Like, we have long memories, which is great. We don't want to completely cast away those traumas or those oppressions. But in order to move forward as people, we have to recognize that we are that we are people, that we're humans at the end of the day.
And you don't want to be reminded of it, but you have to be reminded of it. I mean, it's a weird combination. I mean, we just saw Ken Burns just had the American Buffalo written by my friend Dayton Duncan.
Right.
The last thing he did. And to watch that, it makes me angry and disturbed and sickened that took place. And It didn't happen directly to me, but it happened indirectly to me because it's part of our history, part of our culture, and something to be ashamed about if you were engaged on on the other side of it. What's happening in Israel? What happened in Afghanistan? What's happening in Africa? I mean, it happens a lot around the world. The difference is this is our community and this is our state.
And here.
We have a monument in the state to Custer. It's the only monument, I think, in the United States of somebody who lost the war.
Right.
And that shouldn't be. It's still a glorification, of the loser, not the winner.
Right.
Of that travesty. Anyway.
Do you have aspirations? I know how you're going to answer this. But do you have aspirations after All Nations? Where else? What's next for you? Because you're incredibly impressive and you're well thought. I don't need to tell you what you are. You know what you are. But is there a thought like, hey, maybe I could have a profound impact if I went over here or here?
What do you think I'm going to say?
I know what you're going to say. You're a good politician. But
we're not going to put words in your mouth. That would be wrong. That would be wrong.
Yeah, that's antithetical.
Okay, but you kind of answered my question by asking the question. So I like that answer because I feel like
she didn't even have to say anything, and it wasn't. And you're giving it.
We're so good at inferring
giving the answers for you.
Right. Let me tell you what you want to say. No, but really, what are those thoughts like? How can you have greater impact across the community?
Yeah, I mean, I get told a lot that I should go to D.C., and that's just, I've been to D.C. a couple times. I don't think that life is for me. There's so many people. I grew up in a tiny, tiny town.
Malta.
The last place you want to go is D.C.
Yeah, no, right. No.
It's always better being the outsider putting pressure on than being the insider trying to deal with it. I can tell you that.
Yeah. But is that it? Is that kind of like what can you do here and kind of spread outwards in terms of your impact and your influence?
Yeah, I mean, I love the Missoula community, and I love this Native community. I love this land. I can't imagine, thinking about leaving it, makes me emotional, and I just can't think about that time in my life.
Right.
But I think if I were to go anywhere, I would probably want to go international, and it sounds like, Arnie, you have a lot of experience in that, so maybe you can give me some tips and tricks later. But I think about, all the Aboriginal and Indigenous communities around the world, and, one struggle against colonization is all of our struggles against colonization.
Right.
In any way that I can help in that.
These stories are repeated everywhere. You go to New Zealand, you hear about the Maoris, and I mean, it's just...
And that's where I'd want to go, honestly, is New Zealand.
Right, well, because it's very similar.
I mean, Lord of the Rings, come on.
Yeah.
Listen, let's take a quick break. Our guest is Skye McGinty, Executive Director of All Nations Health Center here in Missoula. Back after this. Arnie, we are back with our guest, Skye McGinty.
Skye, so tell our listeners what events are coming up, and more importantly, how do they get a hold of your organization? How do they reach out to All Nations Health the most easy and direct way?
Sure. We have a website. We're at allnations.health, HEALTH. Our direct clinic line can be reached at 406-829-9515. You can always stop by the clinic. There's always something going on, so feel free to always pop in. But we have a lot of irons in the fire, which I think is not unique to any one nonprofit, but we're always doing something. During the fall, we have Native American Heritage Month coming up, so we'll do a number of round dances at the university. We actually just hosted a Halloween carnival for some Native youth. We're always doing something with winter bingo, also trying to get outside and be physically active as much as we can in this valley in wintertime, especially gathering with our elders and having that intergenerational programming. We run a really popular program called Soup and Stories, where we give out fresh produce and ingredients. We make a traditional meal together, and then we tell creation stories or anecdotes from our elders, and really just a way for us to gather in an authentic communal way. And then into 2024, we'll be looking at the capital campaign and really raising all the funds for our new building.
That doesn't sound like much.
No, not at all.
How much are you trying to raise?
That's tomorrow.
Right.
Right now, we're honing in at about $6 million. The total project will be about $22-25 million.
Nice.
No small feat.
Arnie knows something about that. We've had a lot of guests in who are doing capital
raising money.
Right, yeah.
Capital campaigns.
A lot of good things happening.
Yeah, we helped out with the YMCA's campaign, which was really important to have early childhood, daycare and all those sorts of things. And I'm sure the station. We'll be happy to work on the campaign with you as well.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll help.
Thank
Of
you.
course we will. And speaking of other organizations within town, who are the ones that you traditionally work with? Or pretty much everybody, right? But like
Just about.
Watson Children's Shelter, like everybody.
Yeah, yep. We work really closely with MCPS, Indian Education Department for All. I know they have a different name, but that's how I've known them. Our sister federally qualified health center, Partnership Health Center here in town.
What about First Family?
Yep, we work with them. Mountain Home, shout out to my good friend Steph Goebel over there. They serve about 70% Native women and their children, so we collaborate quite a lot with them too. Anybody in the health and social service resource area, that's where we are.
Wow. You guys are far-reaching, and you're a connector. You're a connector. What's the email address, or not the email, what's the website address again?
Allnations.health.
Allnations.health. All right. This has been a wonderful hour.
Very enjoyed.
Yeah, thank you
very
for
much
having
enjoyed
me.
spending time with you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Really delightful conversation. Thanks for coming up.
Yeah, thanks for
Arnie,
having
I'll
me.
see you next week.
Next week, Scott.